Over the last couple of weeks, as we've been looking at this little book of Ruth, I think we've discovered that the book of Ruth is perhaps one of the more interesting short stories that we find in all of the Bible. We learned 2 weeks ago in chapter 1 something about the wonderful providence of God, particularly as it relates to bringing Ruth to a place where she converts, where she becomes a follower of Jehovah, a follower of God. And we see God providentially working in her life, bringing her to that place of transformation. It's kind of a narrative of a surprising conversion. Chapter 2 develops the storyline a little further. And in that storyline, we see God displaying his loving kindness. His loving kindness toward Naomi, his loving kindness toward Ruth, and even his loving kindness toward Boaz. And we see often God displaying that loving kindness through his people, through the people that he has a relationship with. So those two opening chapters are just wonderful displays of God's providence, of God's working his loving kindness in the lives of people, of God accomplishing his purposes and using people in the lives of other people. Now this morning we come to chapter 3. And as we come to chapter 3 brings us to, I think what we could say is a kind of a disturbing element in the story. All right? Because here in the very opening of this chapter, Naomi urges her daughter-in-law Ruth to make herself basically as attractive as possible, to go out in the middle of the night, to go down to the threshing floor where the barley grain is being processed, and under the cover of darkness, uncover Boaz and lay down next to him. And then Naomi says, well, just wait until he tells you what to do. Now, I don't know about you, but that hardly seems the counsel that we would expect Naomi to give to her daughter-in-law. I mean, is she really telling Ruth to get smelling all good and looking all good and go out in the middle of the night and literally cozy up next to somebody that she doesn't even have a relationship with? She's not married to this man. She's not even dating this man. And just wait and see what happens. I mean, when you think about that, that doesn't seem exactly like the way God would want things done, does it? It doesn't just seem like the way God would do things. In fact, I think it really, it might help. It might remind Boaz of his greater responsibility within the family as a potential deliverer, as a potential rescuer for Naomi and for Ruth. But it doesn't seem to be the wisest way to go about it. So as we launch into this chapter, we kind of begin with this sort of disturbing scene, and we kind of are left scratching our heads a little bit, like, why would you go about it this way? Well, this is a story, and it is a narrative, so it shouldn't surprise us that there are a number of scenes that are played out in each one of these chapters. And here in chapter 3, we find what I think are 4 scenes that are kind of played out in this chapter. We're just going to title scene number 1, A Possible Relative Redeemer. A Possible Relative Redeemer. Now, as we saw last time, actually as we saw 2 weeks ago, Naomi prayed in Ruth chapter 1, verse 8, that God would show Ruth his loving kindness, that God would show Ruth his blessings in her life. And then as we saw last week in chapter 2, God begins to answer that prayer request. He begins to kind of pour out his blessing. He begins to sort of pour out his loving kindness. And in fact, Naomi recognizes that. When she hears that Ruth has been working in the field of Boaz, not only is she grateful for how kind he was to her, but she also adds, she tells Ruth that, hey, Boaz is a close relative of ours. He could be in a position to rescue us. He could be in a position to help us to deliver us from the plight that we find ourselves in. You say, well, why is that? Why would Boaz be in that position? Well, when God called Israel into existence, he established the nation of Israel basically as his own family, as his own people. And the agreement, the covenant that he made with them, that he entered into with them, it made clear that just like he was going to take care of the needs of his family, that the families within his family should take care of their own family and provide for their own families. So in other words, if someone fell into need, a close family member was expected to help. A close family member was expected to help deliver that family, to help provide for that family, redeem that family, take care of that family. So just as God had redeemed his needy people out of their bondage in Egypt and properly met their need and properly took care of them as his family, they were to do likewise to their very own families. If they found one of their family members in need, they were to help their own family. They were to deliver their own family. They were to protect their own family. Let me give you a couple of illustrations of that. First one is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 35. In that chapter, we're told that if there was a loss of life by murder, so if someone in your family was murdered, then the law of God, the covenant that God gave to his people, laid it out very clearly that a relative within the family was responsible to seek justice on behalf of the family. So when there was a need, the family was to step up, help each other out within the family to meet that need. Another illustration. This one comes from Leviticus chapter 25. If a family member found themselves in such deep debt that they literally had to sell themselves into slavery, that was their only hope of ever being able to pay that debt back, then according to God's covenant, a relative within the family was to go and pay to deliver that person. A relative was to buy that person back. In other words, families were to meet the needs of others within their families. Another illustration, if family property was mortgaged in some way, and therefore it was feared that that family property would be lost to somebody else, then another family member was responsible to pay off that mortgage and get the land back so that it stayed within the family. So the whole idea was, God was saying, just like I took my needy family and I rescued them and I delivered them from Egypt, so the families within my family, when they find themselves in need, are to rescue each other. They're to redeem each other. They're to deliver each other and get them out of that position of need. That's one of the major principles of God's covenant. Now, a similar principle of family unity is found in Deuteronomy 25. And it's what came to be referred to as the Levirate Law. The Levirate Law. The word levirate comes from a Latin word, and it's the word lever. And the word lever in Latin is the word for brother-in-law. And the point underlying the Levirate Law was the importance of continuity of both family name as well as family property. They didn't want family property to be lost. They didn't want family property to be given up to some other family, all right? And so what would happen is that if a husband died childless, then his brother, or the widow's brother-in-law, the widow's lever, would then take the widow as his wife, father a son for that dead brother, and by that, the deceased man's name and the deceased man's property would be maintained in the family. So again, it was all about protecting the family. It was all about meeting the needs of the family. It was all about maintaining things, inheritance, property, name within the family. Well, here in the book of Ruth, we actually have two women that are at the center of the story, both of whom are widows. And not only do they have that in common, but they also have in common that neither one of them have any living children. So as we come to chapter 3, they are about to lose their property. They are about to lose everything. Women couldn't own property. They couldn't keep property back in that day. So they're about to lose everything that they have unless somebody comes along and rescues them. And that's why it's not surprising to us that Naomi's attention is captured when she hears that Ruth has been working at gathering grain in the field of Boaz. Boaz is a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech, all right? And so therefore, he is a potential deliverer. He is a potential rescuer. He is a potential relative deliverer or kinsman redeemer. And so she turns to Ruth, and you can see it in chapter 3 and verse 1. And she says to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz a relative?" So right away, it's like Naomi senses what God might have in mind. She senses something of what the plan of God might be, but instead of waiting on God to work out his plan in his time and his way, she simply looks to Ruth and she says to Ruth, should I not seek rest for you? Should I not make it well for you? Should I not take care of this? Is not this my responsibility to do all of this? Now, folks, Boaz, though he is not directly Ruth's brother-in-law, nonetheless, he is in a position within the family to rescue them. He is a potential deliverer. He is a potential redeemer. But the problem is, Naomi isn't willing to wait. Naomi isn't willing to trust. Naomi isn't willing to let God work out his purposes in his time and in his way. So that's scene number one, is the fact that Boaz is a potential relative redeemer. Now all of that brings us to scene number two. And we're going to simply entitle scene number two as Giving Heaven a Helping Hand. Giving heaven a helping hand. I think that's how Naomi saw this. I think Naomi simply thought that she was giving God a little helping hand. That she was just doing a little bit to help God's plan move forward. I mean, why shouldn't Naomi give God a little helping hand? Why shouldn't she do that? And so beginning in verse 2, she gives Ruth a series of instructions. Look at verse 2. Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See that he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet. And by the way, that word feet is also the word for legs. So uncover his feet and legs and lie down next to him. And he will tell you what to do. And Ruth replied, all that you say, I will do. Now, folks, you read through that and you kind of ask the question, what exactly are we to make of this, right? I mean, what are we supposed to do with all of this? I mean, I think Ruth was kind of wondering, what should I make of all this? I mean, here's Ruth. She's from Moab. She was born and raised in a different culture, born and raised in a different land with different customs, different ways of doing things. She's just been in the land of Israel for maybe just a matter of days or weeks or just maybe a little longer than that, not very long at all. And now all of this is sort of put on her. And she's probably wondering in her own head, is this the way they do things around here? Because it just seems a bit odd. So we're left wondering, what to make of this. Ruth is probably left wondering what to make of this. And, we can't help but wonder, what is Boaz going to make of this, right? I mean, here he is, a potential relative redeemer, a potential kinsman deliverer, and suddenly all of this is going to be put upon him, so we can't help but wonder, what is Boaz going to do? How is Boaz going to handle this? What will he do? Well, I think the storyteller here in Ruth gives us sort of a little bit of encouragement, kind of a wonderful hint in the last words that were spoken by Naomi when she says to Ruth that after doing all this, that Boaz will tell you what to do. And then also in Ruth's response where she says, all that you say I will do. I really think the storyteller is trying to share with us a sense that both Naomi and Ruth have a deep confidence in the fact that Boaz can be trusted. They have a deep belief that he will know what to do, not only because he is in the position to deliver them, the position to redeem them, but I think they both also believe that here is a man of godly character, that he will know what's going on and not take advantage of the situation. But at the same time, I think we should have a few reservations about the approach that is taken by Naomi, not only in terms of its risk to Ruth, but also in terms of its risk to Boaz. I mean, if they really wanted to get this thing all worked out, then why not meet and talk in his field in the middle of the afternoon, right? I mean, that would seem like a simple solution to this. Why does it have to be by secret? Why does it have to be in the middle of the night? Why do you have to do all of that? Well, intriguingly, while Ruth follows Naomi's counsel, she also adds a few thoughts of her own. Look at verse 6. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and legs and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over. And behold, a woman lay at his feet and legs. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant." Now listen to her words. "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Folks, I think that that's a very, very important phrase here. Because if you recall, back when we were looking at chapter 2, one of the things that Boaz had said to Ruth when he first met Ruth is that he was so impressed with the fact that Ruth had come to shelter her life under the wings of God, that she had chosen to come back with Naomi, that she had said to Naomi, "Your people are now my people, your God is now my God." And so Boaz praised her for sheltering herself under the protective and the providential and the loving kind wings of God. And if you recall in that conversation that Boaz had with Ruth, not only did he commend her for doing that, but he also basically prayed a blessing for her. He said, "I believe that in that place, God is going to bless you. In fact, I'm going to pray for his blessing upon you." So now here we come to chapter 3, and what does Ruth say? She says, "Boaz, would you shelter me under your wings? Because you are a potential deliverer." So I think she was trying to remind Boaz of what he had done. He had said a chapter earlier, "I praise you that you've come under the wings of God for his protection and deliverance. And I pray, I believe, I trust that God will bless you there." And now Ruth says to Boaz, "Boaz, maybe you're part of the answer to the prayer. Maybe it's under your wings that I will receive God's blessing. Maybe it's under your wings that I will receive God's care." So she's very thoughtful with those words. So I believe that Ruth is trying the best she can to handle this well. But the issue that we have with Naomi is that even though I don't think that she is some kind of scheming and manipulating mother-in-law, I don't think she's just looking out for her own best interest. But what I do think she does in this chapter is that she begins to see something of what God is doing, and in her haste to see God's providence accomplished, in her haste to see God's purposes accomplished, she fails to wait upon God. She fails to wait for God to work out his plans in the way he wants and in the time he wants. So in other words, she acts hastily. I think she acts a bit foolishly with a bit of risk in all of this. I mean, back in chapter 2, when Naomi came home from the day that she had worked in Boaz's fields, and she said, "I'm going to go back out tomorrow," Naomi said to her, "When you go out tomorrow, you stick close to the other women." Now, this is in the middle of the day. You stick close to the other women, because if you get away from the other women, something bad could happen to you. So Naomi in chapter 2 is concerned about Ruth's safety in the middle of the day. But now she sends Ruth out in the middle of the night, all by herself. So there's a bit of a risk there, and the counsel seems a bit hasty and a bit anxious and a bit worrisome. And then she tells Ruth in verse 3, "Don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Only when he lies down, observe the place where he falls asleep, and then go and uncover his feet and legs and lie down next to him." So with Naomi, it's all, shh. Don't tell him you're there. Don't tell him what you have in mind. Wait till he finishes his meal. Wait till he finishes his drinking. Wait till he finds a place to sleep. Wait until he's sound asleep. And then basically, under the cover of darkness, sneak up, uncover his feet and legs, and lie down next to him. Now, folks, I don't know about you, but let's be honest. When we see a certain kind of secrecy, not a happy secrecy like maybe Christmas presents, or a surprise birthday party, or a surprise engagement. But when we see a certain kind of secrecy that is kind of a calculated secrecy, well, we can't help but think that, something is up here. Something is just a bit weird here. And I think it's also clear from the words of Boaz. Because later on, after sort of everything gets discovered and everything is sort of laid out there, what we find here in the text is that Boaz says to Ruth, "Ruth, stay here for the rest of the night, but get up before anybody else wakes up and head home before anybody ever discovers that you were here." So again, it's all on the shh. It's all on the hush. It's kind of all on the secret, all right? So they're all saying, let's just keep this between ourselves. Let's not tell anyone. So again, I don't want us to totally misjudge Naomi. I think she has a sense coming out of chapter 2 and how God had been working through the happenings of their lives, that even though things were happening, they weren't just happening. I think she has a sense that God is providentially putting things together, bringing Boaz into the picture, someone who could deliver them, someone who could redeem them. So I think Naomi senses what God is doing, but she fails to wait on God. Naomi recognizes God is up to something, but she doesn't submit herself to the principle that God's purposes are to be fulfilled in God's ways and in God's time. Now, folks, I wish Naomi was the only one that had a problem with that, right? But I think a lot of times when we find ourselves in worrisome situations, when we find ourselves in stressful situations, when we find ourselves in crisis situations, when we find ourselves in situations where we're really not sure what to do, I think like Naomi, we too can be tempted to take matters into our own hands. We feel that if God doesn't do things speedily enough for us, then it's up to us. We're tempted to devise our own ways of bringing to pass what God has promised to give us. We can easily refuse to wait for Him to bring about His own purposes in His way and His time. And folks, that can be very risky, just like it could have been very risky for Ruth in this context, in this little book. That can be very foolish, just like it could have been very foolish for Ruth and Boaz in this story. You know, that's where I think a verse that we need to keep in mind when we find ourselves in those situations where we're a bit anxious, a bit worrisome, where we're beginning to think to ourselves that what we really need to do is just sort of jump in the pool and give heaven a helping hand. I think one of the verses that we need to remember is found in Psalm 37 in verse 4. In Psalm 37 in verse 4, the psalmist writes, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." What does it mean to delight yourself in the Lord? Well, I think in part at least, it means to trust Him. I think in part it means to wait on Him. I think in part it means to believe in His loving kindness, to believe in His goodness, to believe that He knows what He's doing, and He knows how to do it, and He knows when to do it. When I delight myself in the Lord, all right, I'm trusting Him. I'm believing in Him. I'm delighting in what He's doing, the way He's doing it, and the time He's doing it. And there in that passage it says that when we delight ourselves in the Lord, He does what? He gives us the desires of our heart. You see, I think that's a principle that Naomi missed. All right? Was she just trying to be manipulative? Was she just trying to be scheming? Was she just trying to sort of completely circumvent God? No, I don't want to put her there. But I think what we need to see here is that though she saw the hand of God and had a sense of what God was doing, she didn't want to wait on God. She didn't want to trust in God's timing. She didn't want to trust in the ways of God. So she took matters in her own hand, and she thought it was okay to give heaven a helping hand. But maybe she should have just rested. Maybe she should have just waited on God. If she would have just delighted herself in the Lord, He would have, in His way and His time, given her the desires of her heart. Well, folks, all of that leads us to scene number 3. And in scene number 3, we have a scene of what we're going to call just consistent righteousness. Consistent righteousness. All right? Boaz, as we're going to see in scene number 3, is really an outstanding example of a biblically instructed person who makes instinctively righteous and wise responses in the critical situations of life. Not only does he think biblically, he acts biblically. Here is a guy, Boaz, who though Psalm 119 verse 11 wasn't written yet, I think he understood the principle. In Psalm 119 verse 11, we're told to treasure up God's word in our heart, because when we do that, it will shape our actions, it will shape our motives, it'll shape our decisions. So I think Boaz is a man who has treasured God's word in his heart, And therefore, its implications and its applications flowed naturally into his life in all the circumstances he faced. In all of those circumstances. I mean, look at verse 8. Verse 8. At midnight, the man Boaz was startled, and he turned over, and behold, a woman was laying right next to him at his feet and legs. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And Boaz said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer that is closer to you, nearer to you than I am. So remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. So lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning. But she arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the cloak or the garment you were wearing. Hold it out." So she held it out. And he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went back into the city. Now, folks, again, I think we need to sort of stop and sort of put ourselves into the scene here, right? Sort of put ourselves in the situation. I mean, let's remember, it's midnight, all right? They're kind of out under the stars. And Boaz is startled, but he looks down into the face of a woman that he has very strong affections for. I mean, look again at verse 10. Look at what he says. If you don't think he has affections for Ruth, he says, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You know, this kindness that you've done is greater than any kindness you've done before. You know, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." So here's a young woman that he admires greatly. Here's a young woman that he has a tremendous affection for her. So he has all of that. But then comes this word of very intentional righteousness. He basically looks at Ruth and says, though I have a strong feeling towards you, though I have great appreciation for you, though I have affection for you, my number one commitment is to the Word of God. My number one commitment is to the Word of God. And so he says to Ruth, "Ruth, though I am a possible redeemer, there is actually another relative that is closer to you than I am. And it is that relative that has the first say in this. It is that relative that has the first voice in this." So the stars are beautiful overhead. It's midnight. He has strong affections for her. She likewise for him. They're alone. She's lying next to him. But out of a heart of intentional, consistent righteousness, he not only doesn't touch her, but he lays no claim to her at all. Folks, maybe we could say it this way. His heart is the Lord's before it's hers. Would you think about that for a moment? His heart is the Lord's before it's hers. You see, folks, I think a lot of times, particularly if we're in a situation where we're, maybe looking for a boyfriend or looking for a girlfriend, or we're involved in a relationship with somebody, and that relationship is maybe sort of progressing and getting more serious, and we're thinking more seriously about the future and those kind of things. We're kind of asking ourselves the question, what should be the character qualities? What should be the things I should be looking for in this person? Can I tell you what should be the number one thing on the list, and that this should basically trump every other thing on the list? You look at that person and you say to yourself, is that person's heart the Lord's before it's mine? Folks, that is the number one quality we need to be looking for, all right? So if you're looking for a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or you're in a relationship and you're thinking more seriously about that person, ask yourself the question, as you look at that person, is that person's heart more the Lord's than it's mine? Is their loyalty more to the Lord than their loyalty is to me? Is their commitment more to the Lord than it is to me? I mean, here Boaz, he has a strong affection for this young woman. And her willingness to do what her mother-in-law told her to do indicates that she too had a strong admiration and affection for him. And yet he didn't get all anxious. He didn't get all restless like Naomi did. He didn't try to circumvent the way of God or the timing of God or the plan of God. He says, hey, God's got a plan here. And as much as I want to give my heart to you, my heart first and foremost belongs to the Lord. So keep that principle in mind, that when you're looking at someone in terms of a potential relationship with that person, ask yourself the question, is their heart the Lord's before it's mine? Is their heart the Lord's before it's mine? You see, the attitude of our culture today is basically, whatever feels good in the moment, go ahead and do it. Live and act in the moment. Forget those guilt-producing, dated principles of righteousness and chastity and purity and faithfulness. Just chuck all that stuff. But God says to us through this story, no. God says, be intentional. Be consistent about your righteousness. Don't be like the world. God says, be like Boaz. Be like Boaz. It's okay to be profoundly in love, but we also need to be powerful in self-control, and we need to be consistent and intentional in our righteousness. That's what God calls us to be. That's what he wants of us. So even though we recognize that Naomi's anxiety is understandable, that it's understandable given the culture that they lived in, that it's understandable given the circumstances that they were in. We understand some of those worries. We understand some of those anxieties. We understand that, why she might issue this whole series of sort of anxious commands to her daughter-in-law. Do this, do that, go here, go there. But it's kind of in panic. It's kind of in a restlessness, wanting to do God's will in her way and her time. But by contrast, Boaz has a deep-seated trust in God, a deep-seated rest in God. Boaz believes that not only will God accomplish his purposes because he's sovereign, but it is best to let him accomplish those purposes in his time and in his way. And so Boaz is sort of a contrast to Naomi. I think both of them wanted the purposes of God to be accomplished. Naomi, she rushes it. Boaz is willing to wait. Boaz, his heart is the Lord's before it's Ruth's. And so we need to recognize that. And another thing about Boaz is that the things that he's most concerned about is not simply his own integrity, but he's also concerned about preserving Ruth's integrity, protecting her and providing for her in her time of need. I mean, after all, Boaz has now become the subject of Naomi's sort of rash actions. But how does he respond? Does he respond rashly? No, he does not. He responds with kindness. He responds with wisdom. He responds with compassion. I mean, Boaz knows the culture. He understands something of the dire straits of these two women. And so he seeks to bring a deep assurance to them. He seeks to protect Ruth's reputation and integrity. He seeks to provide for them. So he sends her home full. In fact, we read it a moment ago, or maybe we didn't, but verse 15, he says, bring the garment you were wearing, hold it out. She holds it out. He measures into it 6 measures of barley grain. He puts that on her. He gives that to her, and then she goes home. He goes home. Folks, in all of his actions, in all of his attitudes, in all of his words, Boaz communicates to Ruth and to us what he truly believes about God. Do we understand that? I think there's in one sense that we sometimes say we believe certain things about God, and we indicate through our communication that we believe certain things about God. But the truth is, and we see it here, that it's our personal disposition. It is our attitudes. It is our words and actions that are the actual expression of what we truly believe about God. I can say I believe this about God, and I can talk a great line, but it's actually my attitudes, my dispositions, my actions, my choices, particularly in difficult situations, particularly in crisis situations. It is those things that truly show what I actually believe about God. So we need to recognize that when it comes to what we believe about God, other people breathe in what we breathe out. All right? In other words, what I truly believe about God is caught by other people in my attitudes, in my disposition, in my words, in my behavior. When I'm going through a difficult time, when I'm facing a challenge or a crisis or a trial. It is those things that reveal what we truly, deep down, believe about God. So never forget, when it comes to what we believe about God, that those around us take in, they breathe in what we breathe out about God. And that is especially true of our kids. Especially true of our kids. Well, all of that brings us to scene number 4. Scene number 4, we're simply going to entitle From Restlessness to Rest. From restlessness to rest. Or we could call it from anxiety to peace, or from a lack of trust to trust. I mean, try to imagine the scene. Ruth returns home early that next morning. I kind of imagine that through that night, Naomi probably hasn't slept a lot. I mean, she already displayed some of her worrisomeness. She already displayed some of her anxiety in telling Ruth what to do. And I would imagine that for most of that night, she was pretty anxious. She was pretty worried. What happened? What's going on? How is this going to work out? Maybe she's even a little worried, a little fearful for the risk that she has put Ruth in, sending her out at night all by herself. And so we come to verse 16, and Ruth returns home. And when she came, verse 16, her mother-in-law said, "How did you fare, my daughter? How are you? Is everything okay? Did things go all right?" Then Ruth told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" Folks, I think Boaz understood some of the anxiousness of Naomi. He understood some of the worrisomeness of Naomi. He understood some of the desire that she had to give heaven a helping hand. So Boaz, in sending Ruth home with these 6 measures of barley, is trying to reassure Naomi, hey, God's got this. God's going to work it out. God's going to take care of everything. So the beginning and end of this chapter really stand in sharp contrast. When the chapter opens, Naomi is all restless. She's all worried. She's all concerned. She says, "Ruth, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. It's my job to seek rest for you. It's my job to make sure everything's well for you. It's in my hands to work out the plan of God." But now look at verse 18. In verse 18, she replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So it starts off, go, 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 go. Don't wait, don't wait. Do this, do that. Let's get this done. Let's do it our way in our time. And it ends saying, let's wait. Let's rest. Let's trust. Let's rely. So Naomi, in her desire to see her own needs met and see Ruth's needs met, acted rashly. And it's easy to be like her. We're often in a greater hurry than God is. We need to learn that our God is trustworthy. We need to learn that our God's timing is perfect. We need to learn that His wisdom plans everything for our good. We need to learn that His loving kindness and His loyal love is at work on behalf of His children at all times. So we have every reason to rest in Him, every reason to trust in Him, every reason to wait on Him. Maybe we could put it this way. There's never a good reason to run ahead of God. Never a good reason to run ahead of God. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, today we thank you for what we've learned and studied from Ruth chapter 3 today. Lord, I think with many of us, it is so easy in the circumstances of our life to get anxious, to get worrisome, to try to take things into our own hands. Father, it's not necessarily that we want to go against you. It's not necessarily that we think our purposes are better than your purposes, or necessarily that we have different purposes than you have for us. You have good purposes for us. You have lovingly kind purposes for us. You have gracious purposes for us. But you also have a way of accomplishing those purposes and a timing in accomplishing those purposes. So, Father, if we find ourselves here today, maybe a bit anxious about the circumstances of our life, maybe a bit worrisome about the situations that we're facing, maybe we find ourselves this morning not willing to wait for your purposes to be accomplished in your way, in your time, and we're tempted to act rashly like Naomi. Father, might we take a cue from Boaz today, and might the character of Boaz remind us that no, our God is trustworthy. Our God's loving kindness and loyal love is always acting on behalf of his children. That we are to delight ourselves in the Lord, in his purposes and ways and timing, knowing that he will give us the desires of our heart. So, Father, teach us to rest today. Teach us not to grow restless and anxious in the things of our life, but to rest in you. And by doing so, by our actions, let the world around us know what we truly believe about you. That you are trustworthy, that you are reliable, that you are faithful, that your love is always loyal to your children. In Christ's name we do pray. Amen. Let's stand.